On January 6th, while most of Fishers, Indiana, was still asleep, a quiet notification lit up a father's phone. His daughter's device had disconnected from the home Wi-Fi at 3:30 a.m. It was the kind of alert most parents would ignore. Teenagers fall asleep with videos playing, phones lose signal, connections drop. But something about that moment unsettled him. Just hours earlier, the house had been filled with warmth. There had been laughter, teasing, and a birthday song echoing through the living room. He had joked with his daughter, asking her why he was the luckiest dad in the world. She had smiled and answered that it was because he had the smiliest girl in the whole world.
Hi, Haley.
Hi, Dad.
Can you please remind me why I'm the most luckiest dad ever?
Yeah, because you got the smartest girl in the whole world.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I think so too.
it's right, you know.
I love you.
Her name was Haley Busby. She was 17 years old. By sunrise, she was gone. Haley lived with her parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood known as the Enclave at Vermilion in Fishers, a city often ranked among the safest in Indiana. Neighbors described it as peaceful tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, families who knew one another. It was the kind of place where people believed nothing truly terrible could happen. Haley was described by her family as intelligent, kind-hearted, and full of plans for her future. She was finishing high school and thinking about college. Like many teenagers of her generation, she spent much of her free time online gaming, chatting with friends, and interacting in digital spaces that felt as natural to her as the physical world. What her parents did not fully see was that someone else had been watching. Investigators would later discover that Haley had been communicating online with a 39-year-old man from Columbus, Ohio, Tyler Thomas. The two reportedly met through online gaming platforms and chat services. There was no family connection, no mutual friends, no shared history in the real world. Their relationship existed entirely in digital space. According to authorities, Thomas gradually groomed Haley. Grooming is not loud or violent at the beginning. It often begins with kindness, shared interests, and attention. It builds trust slowly. It isolates emotionally. It creates secrecy. Over time, communication between them intensified. What began as online interaction evolved into something deeper, more private, and more dangerous. On the evening of January 5th, Haley was home with her family. There were no public signs of conflict, no visible distress. She went about her night as usual. Sometime around 10 p.m., she was last seen near the house. In the early morning hours of January 6th, surveillance footage from the neighborhood would later show a vehicle entering the area. Haley walked out of her home willingly and got into that vehicle. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, no kidnapping in the traditional sense. She chose to leave. That detail would prove devastating in more ways than one. Because Haley left voluntarily, law enforcement initially categorized her as a runaway. Under existing alert systems, her disappearance did not meet the criteria for an Amber Alert. There was no confirmed abduction, no immediate evidence of force. The clock was ticking, but the urgency was muted. When Haley did not return and could not be reached, her parents contacted police. Officers began searching the neighborhood, interviewing neighbors, and reviewing security camera footage. The vehicle seen near the Busby home became central to the investigation. Through license plate analysis and digital tracking, investigators traced it to Tyler Thomas in Columbus, Ohio. On January 16th, 10 days after Haley vanished, police confronted him. Thomas admitted he had driven to Fishers and picked Haley up in the early morning hours of January 6th. However, he claimed he had later dropped her off along a road in western Ohio and had not seen her since. According to him, she exited the vehicle voluntarily, and he simply drove away. Investigators were unconvinced. His account lacked detail, it lacked logic, and it lacked proof. Authorities obtained a search warrant for Thomas's residence on Hunter Avenue in Columbus. What they found inside dramatically escalated the case. Digital forensic specialists recovered deleted files from Thomas's phone. Among them were explicit photos and videos of Haley performing sexual acts. Metadata indicated the material had been created inside Thomas's residence. Though he had attempted to erase the files, forensic recovery restored them. The case was no longer simply about a missing teenager. It was now a criminal investigation involving sexual exploitation of a minor and tampering with evidence. But investigators feared something worse had happened. Further analysis of Thomas's movements revealed that after picking Haley up, he had traveled to a short-term rental property in Hocking County, Ohio, near the wooded region of Hocking Hills. The area was remote, isolated cabins surrounded by dense forest. On January 20th, authorities tracked Thomas to that rental property. A search warrant was executed on February 2nd. Inside, forensic teams recovered evidence suggesting a violent crime had occurred. Though officials were careful in releasing details, they later stated they believed Haley had died at that location. Yet there was still no body. Without Haley's remains, prosecutors faced limitations. They had digital evidence. They had suspicious travel patterns. They had inconsistencies in Thomas's statements. But they did not yet have the physical confirmation of homicide. Thomas was arrested and charged with pandering sexually oriented matter involving a minor and tampering with evidence. A judge set his bond at $1.5 million cash surety. He was held at the Franklin County Jail. Still, no murder charge had been filed. Then, through his attorney, Thomas indicated he was willing to cooperate in locating Haley's remains. On February 1st, Thomas led investigators into Wayne National Forest, located in Perry County, Ohio. The forest spans thousands of acres of rugged terrain and dense woodland. It is vast, quiet, and difficult to search without precise direction. Thomas guided FBI agents and local law enforcement officers to a specific trailhead. He then led them deeper into the woods to a burial site. There, beneath the winter soil, investigators discovered human remains. The remains were later identified as Haley Busby. Multiple sources close to the investigation indicated that the body had been dismembered before burial, though officials did not immediately confirm those details publicly. An autopsy was conducted at the Licking County Coroner's Office to determine the cause and manner of death. The runaway case was officially a homicide investigation. Back in Fishers, grief swept through the community. Funeral arrangements were announced, and Haley's family invited the public to attend a celebration of life at I-Town Church. Guests were encouraged to wear pink, her favorite color. Her father publicly thanked the community for their prayers and support during the search. But alongside grief came painful questions. If an alert had been issued earlier, would the outcome have changed? If her disappearance had been classified differently from the beginning, could time have been saved? Authorities explained that because Haley left her home voluntarily, the case did not initially qualify for an Amber Alert under existing criteria. By the time her status was upgraded to endangered missing juvenile, investigators believed she had already been dead for days. The tragedy exposed a gap between runaway classifications and high-risk exploitation cases involving online grooming. Investigators had secured digital evidence, forensic findings from a rental property, and the location of Haley's remains, identified through the suspect's own guidance. Tyler Thomas remained in custody, and prosecutors were building what they described as a comprehensive, multi-jurisdictional case. But the most serious charge, murder, had not yet been formally filed. The legal battle, the courtroom proceedings, and the broader impact of Haley's death were still to unfold. When Haley Busby's remains were recovered from Wayne National Forest, the investigation entered a new phase. What had begun as a missing juvenile case, briefly labeled a runaway situation, was now undeniably a homicide inquiry spanning multiple counties and 2 states. With a body recovered, prosecutors could move forward more aggressively. After leading authorities to the burial site, Tyler Thomas was questioned again. According to court documents, he admitted to burying Haley's body in the forest. However, he continued to minimize or deflect responsibility regarding how she died. Investigators pressed him on inconsistencies. Why had he lied about dropping her off on the side of a road? Why had he deleted digital evidence from his phone? Why did forensic evidence indicate violence inside the Hocking County rental property? Thomas's defense attorney publicly stated that his client cooperated to bring closure to the family, but cooperation did not erase weeks of deception. Digital forensic experts presented timelines extracted from cell phone data, GPS records, and app activity logs. These records showed that Thomas's phone traveled from Columbus to Fishers, back into Ohio, and then to the remote rental location. Data placed Haley's phone in close proximity to his during that time, until her device stopped transmitting altogether. The silence of her phone became one of the most chilling pieces of evidence. The autopsy, conducted at the Licking County Coroner's Office, sought to determine cause and manner of death. While full details were not publicly released immediately, law enforcement later confirmed the manner of death was homicide. Sources close to the case indicated that the condition of Haley's remains suggested dismemberment occurred after death, likely as an attempt to conceal the crime and complicate identification. Inside the Hocking County rental property, forensic teams reportedly recovered biological evidence consistent with a violent incident. Blood evidence patterns indicated the injury did not occur accidentally. Investigators concluded that Haley likely died shortly after arriving at the rental property, within days of leaving her home. This timeline contradicted Thomas's original claim that he had dropped her off safely. Prosecutors now had digital evidence, forensic confirmation, a burial site identified by the suspect, and proof of deliberate concealment. The case was ready to escalate. Within weeks of the body's recovery and autopsy confirmation, homicide charges were formally filed in Hocking County, Ohio, where investigators believed the killing occurred. Thomas was charged with murder, along with additional counts related to sexual exploitation of a minor, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. He appeared in court in shackles, facing the judge as prosecutors outlined the severity of the allegations. Bond conditions remained strict, and he continued to be held without release. Through his attorney, Thomas entered a plea of not guilty to the murder charge. The defense strategy appeared to focus on challenging intent and potentially disputing the timeline of death. However, the prosecution emphasized the deliberate nature of the concealment and the digital trail that tied Thomas directly to every stage of the crime. As prosecutors built their case, they focused on several key pillars. Online grooming and exploitation evidence demonstrated that Thomas initiated and maintained inappropriate communication with Haley online. Recovered videos and images prove sexual exploitation occurred inside his residence. False statements to police. Thomas initially lied about dropping Haley off in Western Ohio. Those lies, prosecutors argued, demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Forensic evidence at the rental property. Biological and physical evidence tied Haley to the cabin in Hocking County and indicated a violent act occurred there. Burial and dismemberment. The act of transporting, dismembering, and burying the body in a remote section of Wayne National Forest showed deliberate concealment. The prosecution framed the case as one of manipulation, exploitation, and calculated violence, not accident. Pre-trial hearings focused heavily on digital evidence admissibility. Defense attorneys scrutinized how data was collected, recovered, and preserved. They questioned whether any of Thomas's statements were made under coercion or without proper legal counsel. Prosecutors maintained that all evidence was lawfully obtained through warrants and forensic procedures. Meanwhile, Haley's family attended court appearances quietly, often seated behind prosecutors. Observers noted her father's composure, though grief was evident. In statements to the press, her family spoke less about the suspect and more about Haley herself, who she was, what she loved, the plans she had. They refused to allow her story to be defined solely by her death. Back in Fishers, Indiana, Haley's death sparked outrage and soul-searching. Many questioned the limitations of the Amber Alert system. Because Haley left voluntarily and there was no evidence of forced abduction at the outset, authorities had not issued a statewide alert. Her father began advocating for what became known as Haley's Law, a proposed measure calling for expanded alert criteria when credible evidence suggests grooming, exploitation, or high-risk circumstances, even if the teen left willingly. He argued that predators exploit gray areas in the system, particularly in cases involving online relationships where teenagers believe they are acting independently. Community members organized awareness events focused on online safety education. Schools began discussing digital grooming tactics and warning signs more openly. Haley's story became more than a criminal case. It became a cautionary example of how the digital world can mask real-world danger. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors prepared to present a comprehensive narrative. The online grooming that built trust. The planned pickup in the early morning hours. The sexual exploitation captured on video. The travel to an isolated rental property. The forensic evidence of homicide. The dismemberment and burial in a national forest. The defense signaled it would challenge the prosecution's timeline and possibly argue lack of intent or alternative explanations for death. However, the burden would be heavy. Digital evidence is often unforgiving. Location data, timestamps, deleted files restored through forensic tools, these do not rely on memory or interpretation alone. They create a map, and in this case, that map traced every step from Fishers, Indiana to rural Ohio woods. For Haley's family, no courtroom outcome could restore what was taken. In public statements, her father described her as smart, beautiful, kind, and caring. He thanked the community for standing beside them during the search and the months that followed. At her celebration of life, guests wore pink, her favorite color, filling the church with a sea of soft brightness against overwhelming grief. The pain extended beyond one household. Friends, classmates, and neighbors struggled with the realization that someone from outside their community had gained access through something as common as online gaming. The lesson was difficult but unavoidable. Danger does not always arrive violently at the door. Sometimes it enters quietly through a screen. The case of Haley Busby exposed multiple vulnerabilities. The speed at which online grooming can escalate. The limitations of alert systems designed around traditional abduction scenarios. The complexity of investigating crimes that cross digital and physical boundaries. Haley left her home voluntarily, believing she was meeting someone she knew. But trust built online can be manufactured, intentions can be hidden, and by the time reality becomes clear, it can be too late. The investigation that followed was thorough, multi-jurisdictional, and ultimately successful in locating her remains and building a case. Yet the tragedy could not be undone. As the legal process continues, Haley's story stands as both a criminal case and a warning about manipulation, about complacency, and about the urgent need for awareness in a world where young people form connections beyond the visibility of parents and communities. Her life ended in a remote forest hundreds of miles from home. But the conversation sparked by her death continues in courtrooms, in classrooms, and in families asking how to protect their children in a digital age. No sentence can bring her back. But accountability, vigilance, and education may prevent the next tragedy.